Alright, I watched the first episode of Kyoto Teramachi Sanjou no Holmes, and I really liked it. And I even wrote up some words describing to a friend why I liked it so much, so this might be a tad more articulate than usual. But yeah, I liked it way more than I was expecting. Um, I'm a moderate shoujo fan. I like some shoujo works a lot, and in general, I find shoujo enjoyable. But there are a lot of little things about shoujo that tend to turn me off, especially with some of the bigger works. I've tried or finished a lot of the classics in the shoujo genre, and there's often things that kind of rub me the wrong way about them. But even then, some of my favorites, like Akatsuki no Yona, very much a shoujo show, I absolutely love. So this this show bears a lot of similarities, actually, to the previous show we talked about, Tsu, Tsukomogami Kashimas. Uh, it's got it's also about these antique, cherished items, and it's sort of like the previous place was a rental shop. This is an antique store, but it's got a similar type of mystery edge to it. Also, dynamic of two characters, though their character dynamic is much, almost completely different. And in this show, there's no supernatural effort element, which is exactly what I was complaining about with the previous show. So already a step up. I really like the atmosphere and aesthetic of the store, especially with how all there's these different pieces and antiques all around. It's very just enjoyable and comfy, especially with how much bloom and like the light streaming in from the windows. It feels really comfy and welcoming, and also sort of fantastical in seeing all these different pieces of art scattered about, and the very sort of regal stylings of the building itself. I know some might say that the characters don't really blend well into the backgrounds, but I think it works pretty well because they have a bit more muted color palette, and maybe this is just because I'm used to it, but this dynamic of a slightly more realistic background against this style of design where they're a little bit more angular, and they have slightly more muted color palette, uh, and there's a couple other hallmarks, but it's a little hard to describe without thinking about it a little more. Is pretty common with this type of story, particularly in reverse harems. It's especially common. So maybe it's just I'm used to it, so it doesn't seem quite so strange to me. But yeah, and the realistic backgrounds work particularly because of what they're trying to express with the story, where they're highlighting all these art pieces. So having this more realistic style helps them to better realize the beauty of the artwork that they're demonstrating to us. I really like the soundtrack. It's very stereotypical, but in a way that just does everything right. It's got a very classical Baroque style, pretty light, lots of pizzicato, xylophone, even some harpsichord in the first piece, but yeah, it just does its style kind of perfectly. It matches the tone and has great flow, and also manages to have a sense of direction, which is often the thing I find lacking in this style of background music. Is it just feels like it's there and doesn't do anything. Whereas here, in almost I would say a similar way to why I like the music of MMO Junkie so much, it does feel like there's a progression to the song. It has a beginning and an end, and even in like the first piece, there was this sort of call and response between the parts that just brings it all together and makes it especially nice, and makes it feel like it has some meaning to it or something to it, rather than just being there to make it not weird that everything is quiet. I talked about this a little bit in my main channel video on High Score Girl, but I like stuff that caters to a really specific interest, and especially with how this show goes about it. It's a subject that I like because I like art, but I don't really know much about it. I'm always open to going to the museum and, looking at old stuff, but it's not necessarily something I'm particularly knowledgeable on. So, getting to see something interesting highlighted that I don't know a lot about is fun. Um, Especially because it's highlighting a lot of more Japanese things because it's a Japanese antique shop. A lot of the antiques are going to be Japanese compared to whereas if you watch like one of those I don't know, like Antique Roadshow or something like that, most of it is, at least to my memory, it usually is European works because that's sort of what's more conventionally in the discussion when it comes to classical art. So it's cool to see, another side uh, to older art. Um, yeah, and especially it's compelling because you have this representation of. I mean, it's a little boosting, the ego of the artist because we're artists and we like art. Uh, is that it talks a bit about how art can sort of the surpass the limits of time and still convey emotions and meaning even beyond such a great divide in time and not actually knowing the person but by engaging with the work you can sort of connect with them or connect across time or connect with the emotions they were expressing. So yeah, that's the main reason I like it. I like the main girl. I like the guy. It is a pretty stereotypical dynamic, especially for shoujo. But I think it works particularly in the show because though the guy is, as per usual, he's sort of in the stance of like he knows everything. He's always 2 steps ahead. He's got everything under control. This works because they're sort of highlighting this thing that's more of a specific thing that needs to be explained to a degree. So it gives him a good reason to explain it because she's more naive, uh, and it feels natural, like we're learning alongside her, rather than the show just needs to stop and explain stuff to the audience for 2 minutes. So yeah, I liked it quite a bit. So I just finished episode 1 of Yuragi-sou no Yuuna-san, and I enjoyed it more than I expected, which was at all. Generally, I'm not really a fan of these types of shows. Just like they don't really appeal to me on any front. Uh, but I don't know. There was just something about this episode that had me enjoying it. The soundtrack was very pleasant. It was just constantly this upbeat, jammy style that made the whole experience, tied the whole experience together. The girls are pretty cute. I like their designs quite a bit, except for the uh, big bosomed lady. Not a fan of her, but that's more personal taste. But the other girls, I quite like all their designs. Especially the main ghost girl. I like her quite a bit. And like the general main premise is this guy. He calls himself a hands-on psychic. Like he, by punching, that's how he gets rid of ghosts. Which is, I I don't know. That's just funny to me for some reason. Just the term hands-on psychic in itself is quite amusing. So, right, he goes to stay at this hot spring. The main girl, who's also a ghost at the hot spring, antics ensue. And even though I would say this is really not something I would like, and it definitely feels falling in the trappings of the genre, maybe it's just a mood thing. Like, maybe I just felt like I did kind of need, I just needed a comfy show. Like, with the mood I'm currently in, I just kind of needed a comfy show. And this filled that. It was really comfy. The visuals, the like character uh, designs and animation of them, especially with the color usage, reminds me a lot of like Doga Kobo Is it Doga Kobo? I think that's what it is. The studio did New Game, right? Reminds me a lot of their style. Not quite as good, but still pretty solid, even though there are some janky moments. Um, yeah, it's got that very just like warm atmosphere to it. Uh, and it's not too abrasive. I do tend to find that some shows that are sort of like this, like I guess an example would be um, Slow Start or what's that show called? What's it called? Comic Girls. That's right. Often I don't something about them is abrasive to me because the characters have to be constantly talking and emoting and screeching at the top of their lungs. I find it kind of obnoxious. This show, maybe I'm wrong, but it definitely seems less annoying. I like most of the voice acting, which usually isn't the case with these types of shows, and it's not quite so in your face about it. I can just sort of sit back and chill out and enjoy the ride, enjoy the cute girls, enjoy the warm story. It's like it's very sappy, but sometimes you need something sappy in your life, right? Sometimes sappy is okay. So I don't know if I'll make it to the end of this one, but I'm glad I watched at least one episode. So I made it through about 6 minutes of Harukana Receive before I really couldn't do anymore. Yeah, this show I have problems with on pretty much every front. So in the first place, the introductory scene, usually the kind of scene that the show is trying to grab you with and establish its general tone or character or just something good about it. Something to grab your attention. And of course they start with a really lame, cheesy, sort of like inspirational type line that just had me rolling my eyes, to be honest. And then factor into that I don't like the way the show looks. I will admit there are times when it looks good. Like the shot composition is on point. What it's going for looks like it's executing that well. But what it's going for doesn't really appeal to my aesthetic sensibilities. And the thing is, it doesn't even hit that cap most of the time. Like, I would break this down in these 6 minutes I watch, right? I can't make broad statements about the show because I barely finished. I didn't even finish half of the first episode, so take my opinion with a grain of salt. But like, 25% of it looked passable, 25% of it looked really good, and 50% of it looked terrible, like just terrible. This is part of the problem. It's really overproduced. There's a lot of effects, a lot of CG, a lot of bloom and brightness and all this so much extraneous stuff that's really it's a little too much, especially when it doesn't look good. Like occasionally they get together, all the stars line up and it looks good. But that's like one scene. And then the other ones just look super janky and ugly and gross, and I don't like it at all. I really dislike its aesthetics. It doesn't help that I don't find the character designs attractive at all, or yeah, I don't like them. They've got this weird thing with their eyes where it's like the top of the eye is like a chestnut color, and then there's this little hazy color at the bottom that's like a half circle that's like, it's like a lime green, I would say, maybe, and it looks really, it doesn't make sense, and it looks terrible, especially because it's sort of like not a gradient, but sort of layered on top of the brownish color, and it looks really stupid, and I'm really confused as to what it's even supposed to represent. Anime eyes have gotten so far away from what even the concept of what a real eye is. This is particularly offensive to me because I don't think the colors work together well at all, and two of the presumably main characters both have that same eye type and the same coloration in their eyes. So not too hype about that aspect, and the characters didn't really do anything in this beginning to get me thinking that they're gonna be particularly engaging. Like, I think they're just trying to establish, some cute girls, but if I don't find them cute, what's the point? And that's really what it comes down to, especially with the fact that aesthetically I don't care for this show. Not only do I think it doesn't execute its aesthetic well, but also just like the bright sunny beach, like, I mean, it's fine, but that's not really what I think of when I think of my go-to beautiful, comfy atmosphere or look in general. I'm more a fan of literally anything else in nature, to be honest. I'm not the biggest fan of the beach. So, yeah, this really isn't the show for me. Okay, I watched the first few minutes of Ongaku Shoujo, and usually I try to start these things off with what I liked. I don't want to even though the name of the show is Drop or Not. I never want to let things get too negative. I usually try and give the show as much credit as I possibly can, even if I am dropping it. I try and be pretty fair. I also try and, make sure to highlight the things that were well executed alongside the things that I didn't think were well executed. The issue here is I don't think anything was well executed. I don't like the designs. I don't think they're really generic and bland and boring. I don't like the direction. I don't like the music. I don't like the characters. There's nothing. I got nothing. This show feels like, I mean, it's an idol show, okay? It feels like someone watched idol shows and took all the little individual elements of what one considers to construct an idol show and just threw them together haphazardly without actually understanding how to construct a proper show. Yeah, the way scenes go from one to another just feels like it's jumping between, okay, we need to have this type of scene, and this type of scene, and this type of scene, this type of character, without there being any intelligence behind its construction. Yeah. Here's my impression of Zoids Wild. Life is too short for bad CG. Alright, I was gonna watch the Violet Evergarden special, and I watched the first few minutes. It was amazing. I loved it. I love Violet Evergarden so much. But the subtitles are atrocious. So, I'm gonna wait until it gets some quality subtitles, and then I'll watch it. Okay, made it about halfway through Lord of Vermillion Guren no O's first episode when I realized I was literally only watching for the soundtrack. So, yeah, not really worth my time. Speaking of the soundtrack actually was pretty solid. I mean, it wasn't amazing by any means, but it had some really catchy melodic lines. It was generally well constructed. I had a few small qualms. It does feel a little bit too standard with its construction, very much like layering and arpeggios and typical harmonic progression. But it was pretty solid, and I looked at the composer on NDB, and it's composed by Aratame Sho, who, this is his first soundtrack he's done. It's about 25 years old, but he did the fantastic Yoru Camp opening theme, one that starts with the banging pianos, like da da da. Yeah. So, I hope he works on more good soundtracks, because I like his style. But for this one, unfortunately, not the best. Starts off with a battle sequence in this abandoned, or like more rather ruined city out in the desert, and they're fighting with these magical powers of red glowiness that look pretty stupid. to be honest. And basically everyone dies, everyone kills each other, and it's a dramatic scene with lots of emotion because we really care about these characters that we've literally never seen before. This scene goes on for way too long, by the way. Usually, you know, I never really like these types of scenes ever in any situation, but if they're gonna happen, keep it to like a minute. Just give us a brief action sequence to tease what comes later, and then jump to the real story. No, this sequence goes on for what feels like hours. I think it must have been at least 2 or 3 minutes long, but either way, it was way too long. Way too long. Because they're focusing, it's not just a battle sequence, it's like the characters have their dialogue to each other, and it's supposed to be emotional because there's all this background behind it, but we don't have any context for that, so it means literally nothing. And then we jump back to, and we see these two friends, or brothers, I'm not sure, at least the guy's living with them, the white-haired dude, and they're having a kendo match, then they go to school, and then some sort of supernatural occurrence starts happening, like everybody's getting ringing their ears. And that's about where I gave up, because I realized I was only listening for the soundtrack and literally nothing else. It didn't really do anything particularly egregious in that section, but again, I was kind of just waiting for something interesting to happen, and then when something interesting happened, I was not interested, which is the failing of the show, I would say, especially considering that the visuals are pretty bad. There's a lot of cuts in here that I just laughed. Like, I was watching, and it just made me laugh out loud because it looked so goofy and stupid, even for dramatic scenes. Good. I have my doubts as to whether or not you're going to be able to get me emotionally invested if I'm already laughing at your visuals. So, yeah, that's my case with Lord of Vermillion.